last few years, endurance racing has had this bit of a mini resurgence, and now it's as popular as it's ever been. Balance and performance aside, the World Endurance Championship and IMSA have had new leases of life breathed into them thanks to the rules and regulations set out by the LMDH and Le Mans Hypercar categories, which allows the motorsport equivalent of, well, crossplay in video games. Cars built under LMDH regulations can run in the WEC, and vice versa. Although, currently, Aston Martin is the only car built to hypercar regulations that is running in IMSA. Ferrari doesn't run in IMSA because they see the WEC as being more worth their time, and Toyota doesn't run in IMSA because it already has representation in NASCAR. But Ford, McLaren and Hyundai will be coming in over the next 2 years, with Hyundai debuting next year. Their engine is 2 rally car engines glued together. That's awesome. But it's actually been pretty sweet to see endurance racing go the way it currently has, because prior to hypercar was the beloved LMP1. Multi-million-pound spaceships whizzing around the circuits of the World Endurance Championship with hybrid, 4-wheel drive, traction control and downforce for days, all while achieving 200 miles an hour plus down the Mulsanne at Le Mans. Pretty awesome stuff, but as we've seen over the years that I've been doing these videos, there was quite a drawback with LMP1. Costs, because by the time LMP1 ended, it was completely untenable for anybody new that wanted to come in. Why is that? Well, look at the era where LMP1 was actually good. That period between 2015 and 2017 that had Porsche, Audi, Toyota and briefly Nissan. Audi had been dominating hard prior to that point, something we'll probably revisit in a bit, but it seemed to pick up a bit in that 2016 period, where Toyota might have won Le Mans if not for that breakdown on the last lap of the race. A picture by James Moy that has become one of the iconic pictures of the race in the last 10 years. Hello darkness, my old friend. But, as Nissan found out, if you screw it up and your car is terrible, you're a year behind everybody else. And Nissan would have had to have spent a lot of money to catch back up. They were just not prepared to do it. Then Porsche pulled out in the wake of the Volkswagen emissions scandal, and Audi wasn't too far behind. So it left just Toyota with their rocket ship. Customer, off-the-shelf, non-hybrid LMP1s were being run by the likes of Rebellion and so on, so there was still competition, right? Well, no. Because the EOT, or equivalence of technology rules, basically said that it was impossible for those non-hybrids to challenge the hybrids, and the only hybrid left was Toyota. And the costs had risen so much that nobody was going to join, just in case they were Nissan 2.0. So how much are we talking about? Well, Porsche and Audi were rumoured to be spending $250 million a year by the time 2016 rolled around. By comparison, the team in Formula 1 that spent that much in 2016 was Red Bull. But there was an upside to all of this, because during this period the LMP1s were able to be a bit more, well, open in the development of the engines, with Audi running their famous diesels. Through being more fuel efficient in the early part of the LMP1 cycle, the Audis were able to spend less time in the pits and more time on track, saving fuel and going longer into stints than their rivals. It was something that allowed them to be the dominant manufacturer in top-level endurance racing in this period. But Audi wasn't... Oh, God. But Audi wasn't the... I am so ill. Right, let me try that again. But Audi wasn't... I am so ill, I do apologise. But Audi wasn't the only manufacturer running diesels, because Peugeot gave it a go as well. In 2006, the LMP1 rules changed, so the cars were going to be nudged towards being closed cockpit from 2007 onwards. And Peugeot could see that they could build a car that was more aerodynamically sound and more structurally rigid when it was closed cockpit. At the same time, it was going to be the first closed cockpit LMP1 since Bentley's Speed 8, and Peugeot's first attempt at a top-level Le Mans prototype since 1993, the last time they won Le Mans. So Peugeot came up with something that looked a little like this, with the doors having a 2-hinge setup that allowed the door to open wider without breaking the rules regarding how big the doors could actually be. But overall, it was 2 meters wide, just under 3 meters long, and weighed about 930 kilos. On the outside, it looks like your standard late 2000s prototype, but underneath all that bodywork was Peugeot's pièce de résistance, something I didn't know until today. It had a V12. A diesel V12. A 5.5 litre diesel V12 to be precise, 5.5 litres being the maximum that the LMP1 rules allowed at this particular time. The V-bank angle was done at 100 degrees to lower the centre of gravity, and then they turbocharged it. And Peugeot's naming for the engine was the HDI, which is derived from high pressure direct injection, and its full name was the HDI FAP, with FAP being derived from the French for particulate filter. The gearbox meanwhile was designed and built by Ricardo, but both Peugeot and Ricardo had their own difficulties to overcome when putting it all together. For one, the diesel engine put more torque stress on the drivetrain compared to petrol-driven engines, so the gearbox not only needed to withstand these extra forces, but also be able to withstand all that extra torque over the course of a 24-hour race in the case of Le Mans. That was doable, but the problem that came with that extra sturdiness was the extra weight that the car didn't need. So according to Ricardo's own website, Peugeot and Ricardo came up with a solution that involved them shifting the position of the dog gears to the input shaft, instead of putting them on the output shaft. In doing so, the gearbox would be running upside down, for want of a better term. Doing this meant that the torque manipulation effect was almost eliminated, and then Ricardo could fit small clutch rings onto the gearbox. Clutch rings that could withstand 1200 Nm of torque. Given that Peugeot was running a diesel, they felt that 6 gears was enough. Audi ran 5 on the R15, upping it to 6 for the R18. The R10 also ran a 5-speed. The other challenge was somehow mating this gearbox to the V12 while keeping everything well packaged. V12s are long, and the clutch was deliberately placed right at the back so it could be quickly changed if it failed during a race. So what does a V12 diesel even sound like? Well, I'm glad you asked. The first race for the V12 HDI FAP was at the 1000 km of Monza in the Le Mans series, which is the ACO's European-based endurance series, or now just called ELMS, or European Le Mans Series. This was a series of 1000 km races at European racetracks, and Sao Paulo for some reason. But the first round of the 1000 km of Monza was won by Peugeot with their new car. Now, asterisks here, because Peugeot was the only manufacturer in that series. No Audi, no Bentley, nobody else. The rest of the LMP1 category was made up of off-the-shelf or independent manufacturer cars, like Pescarolos, Lolas and Zytex. But even then, it was close for Peugeot, the number 8 car winning by just 3.5 points from the Pescarolo team. When they got to Le Mans, the Peugeots were initially faster than the Audis, but when they got into the actual race, it looked like that the Audis had been sandbagging the whole time. Because the Peugeots were fastest in testing and qualifying, with Stefan Sarrazin setting the pace with a 3:26.707. Peugeot then took pole for the 24 hours, but when the race began, the Audis buggered off. The Audis were faster in a straight line compared to Peugeot, and they were much more stable in the corners. The number 8 Peugeot did finish second though, with the other Peugeot retiring with engine difficulties. Going into 2008, Peugeot started looking for ways of expanding the car's reach, entering a single car into the 2008 12 Hours of Sebring, where it led a good chunk of that race before suffering from reliability issues. But it did actually finish that race. The big test for Peugeot now was that in the Le Mans series, Audi had entered a couple of cars, and the Peugeots would have some proper competition. At Le Mans, once again, the Peugeots were fast. Very fast, it has to be said. The 908 was now lapping in the 318 range, while the Audis could only get into the 25s, which is absolutely incredible pace. So the Peugeot won then? No. It started raining during the race and the pace evaporated due to an unstable car. Not only that, the Audis had much shorter pit stops, so the Peugeots were overhauled that way as well. In the Le Mans series, meanwhile, they were leading the championship right up to the round at Silverstone, where both cars were lost to accidents and Audi snatched the titles. But then 2009 came round and Peugeot finally achieved their goal. Once again, for the third year in a row, the Peugeots were rapid in qualifying. Well, the number 8 Peugeot was rapid. Sarrazin put his car on pole with a time of 3:22.888, just over 3/4 of a second faster than Alan McNish's Audi, which took second. Behind the Audi were 3 more Peugeots, a factory entry in third, a 2008 spec car in fourth run by Pescarolo, and the third Peugeot in fifth. Factory Peugeot, that is. The number 7 car in third was nearly 2 seconds off Sarrazin, the Pescarolo 2.1 seconds off, and the other Peugeot 2.3 off. So they were quite closely matched, really. The Peugeot lineups were pretty stacked, it has to be said. The number 7 was driven by Nicolas Minassian, Pedro Lamy and Christian Klein. The number 8 by Stefan Sarrazin, Frank Montagny and Sebastien Bourdais. And the number 9 driven by David Brabham, Marc Genet and Alexander Wurz. All of them having some sort of Formula 1 experience, except for Minassian, who was formerly of the McLaren setup but went on to have an okay career in sports cars. In addition, Wurz and Brabham already had a Le Mans win to their name. Sort of. Brabham won in 1993 driving with John Nilsson and David Coulthard, but the car was disqualified controversially for something to do with the catalytic converters. He also had class wins in 2007 and 2008. And funnily enough, 1993, when that Jaguar XJ220 was disqualified, who won the race? Peugeot. The ACO had also changed the rules a bit for this particular edition of the 24. The diesels run by Audi and Peugeot were 4 seconds a lap slower on average, and Audi had gone to Le Mans without doing any considerable amount of testing. They'd not been able to get a decent setup out of the car, and the Le Mans aero package wasn't working properly, with every single one of the works Audi drivers saying that the car was understeering, badly. Tom Christensen said that the Audi was much better in high downforce configurations, but running the Sebring setup would knacker top speeds. In addition, previously the Audis could go and go and go and go. Now they were struggling to double stint tyres, something more teams were doing now because the rules were changed regarding pit stops. Teams were only allowed one man with an airgun, so it was now quicker to triple stint the tyres rather than double stinting. But since Audi could barely double stint their tyres, they lost a lot of time. But it seemed for a time over the course of that 24 hours that neither Peugeot nor Audi wanted to win. The number 7 was released too early from a pit stop and got clattered by the Pescarolo 908, resulting in a puncture. 2 of the 3 Audis went off track in the first 12 hours, with one of them eliminating itself from the race. Then the Audis started having technical issues, with the number 1 Audi losing 7 laps to the leader during the night. And this gap stabilised as the sun came up. Peugeot ended up winning the 2009 24 Hours of Le Mans with a 1-2. Brabham, Genet and Wirtz in the number 9 won by a lap from the number 8 that had been so rapid over 1 lap in qualifying. Christensen, McNish and Capello in the R15 were 3rd, 7 laps down, while the Manassian, Lamy and Clean car was 6th and 13 laps down. The Pescarolo car, which had been involved in a couple of accidents, managed to finish 8th, but only completed 360 laps versus the 382 that the winners did. But then going into 2010, the car seemed to be able to do something with its performance. It won the 12 Hours of Sebring with a 1-2, and then won the Spa 1000 km in the Le Mans series. When they got to Le Mans, the car was once again a 1-lap monster, but in the race, all 4 cars entered would not finish, because the Peugeot engines all suffered horrendous reliability, with 3 of the 4 cars dropping out with engine problems. The 4th wouldn't finish because of a suspension problem. Peugeot was now using a titanium con rod or connecting rod. On 3 of the 4 cars, that titanium rod had failed. But the American racing wasn't limited to just Sebring, because at the end of 2010 Peugeot sent a car to the Petit Le Mans race at Road Atlanta, and it qualified 1-2, and then finished 1-2 in the race itself, beating Audi. It would take one final victory at the 1000 km of Zhuhai in China, where the win was quite controversial, apparently. I think it might have involved team orders or something, because it led to Peugeot winning that year's championship. But that would be the end of competition for the 908 HDI FAP, but it would get a revision for 2011. It became simply the 908, and it only ran for 1 year in the Intercontinental Le Mans Cup. The number 7 dominated the season, winning all the races except for Le Mans, where it came second and took the championship easily. When the car went to Sebring, it was proving to be pretty quick against the Audis, but the constant deploying of the safety car evaporated any leads they could build. Then, later into that race, Genet crashed into Capello, and they finished 3rd and 8th. For 2011, LMP1 rules had changed to bring the sport into the latest and greatest, in terms of technology available. From 2011 onwards, LMP1 cars could have kinetic energy recovery systems just like Formula 1 cars had, or they could go full hybrid, which meant that the manufacturers were downscaling engines because the electrical energy was now going to be doing some of the heavy lifting. But even then, the rules had shrunk the engines anyway for anybody using turbos and or diesels. Back then, the hybrid was for power. Now, on Le Mans hypercars and LMDH cars, it's for fuel economy. The LMP1s were also now allowed 4-wheel drive, which made them absolutely insane out of slower corners, and the hybrid systems were limited to 670 horsepower between the braking zones. That's 500 kilowatts for those not using old money. So, the long story short is, the old car was obsolete. It couldn't have a V12 anymore, and it certainly couldn't have a 5.5 litre V12 anymore. So Peugeot had designed this all-new car that initially didn't have any of the 4-wheel drive hybrid gizmos and stuff like that, but there was the ability to retrofit it later on. There were also aerodynamic rule changes. All cars had to have a shark fin fitted for straight line stability, and I think the rear wings had been put on a crash diet as well to make them smaller and therefore generate less downforce. But that might have been another year, I'm not sure. The new car was 150 horsepower down on the previous model, but the car was now a lot more agile. It was entirely brand new. Not a single thing was carried over. Not a bolt, not a washer, not a screw. Everything brand new. Except for the windscreen wiper though. That's funny. When they got to Le Mans, the Peugeots proved to be more economical because the car was now using a 3.7 litre V8 diesel that was a lot smaller than the previous V12. But even with fewer pit stops than the Audis, the Peugeot finished just 13 seconds behind the winning Audi, driven by Marcel Fasler, André Lotterer and Benoit Treluyer. I think that's how it's pronounced. My French is terrible. Peugeot was supposed to turn the car into a hybrid for 2012, but Peugeot's economic situation wasn't great, so they just, well, simply abandoned the project. And that was the year that Peugeot was supposed to finally enter the World Endurance Championship. And that's the thing that got me while I was putting this thing together. You'd think the car would be in the WEC, but it wasn't. It was racing in what is now ELMS and doing Le Mans instead before taking on the WEC. Maybe to get the car ready, I don't know. But its stats are pretty decent. 19 wins in 28 races is a decent return, and it won the 2009 24 Hours of Le Mans with further podiums in 2007, 2008 and a second place in 2009 on top of that win. It also won Sebring and Petit Le Mans, so yeah, not all bad really. It wasn't as successful as the Audis, clearly, but it could do well when the stars aligned. But the problem is, at this point in LMP1 history, is that it was Audi and then everybody else, when they turned up. Bentley and Peugeot were the only real manufacturer opposition until the Toyotas and Porsches came along, and like mentioned, LMP1 was pretty dull at this point. It only got properly exciting in that period between 2015 and 2017. But Peugeot has since come back. They had the 9X8 with its unique design of no rear wing, although they have since put a wing on. But that's the beauty of the hypercar rules. There's a bit more freedom to do this sort of outlandish stuff, and Peugeot was brave enough to try it. It's just a shame that the wingless car never worked, really. And hopefully they get their head around it and it starts doing well because, well, a French car doing well at Le Mans is good for business. It's quite hard to describe the 908 really because, well, it's a winner. You know, it did well, but when the Audis were the kings of LMP1, the Peugeots and the Bentleys by extension were just, well, there was this kind of, well, shadow obscuring them. I don't know. I mean, as you can probably tell, I'm struggling a little bit here, so if you've got any answers, do put them on a postcard. So then, a look at the Peugeot 908, the car that won Le Mans with a V12 diesel engine. If this has been a fun look through the motorsport history books, then do give the video a like so I know I did a good job, and for more stuff from the channel, get subscribed and also get that bell on so you never miss out on anything else that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the rad lads over at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help with the picture purchasing piggy bank or otherwise keeping the lights on around here, there'll be a link to Patreon down in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and any other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks for any one and done donations if you want to buy me a drink this New Year's, and there's also memberships so you can do Patreon style support but without going to Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.